Just when you didn't think it could get any better for Penn State recruiting right now, in back-to-back days, they land yet another priority recruit.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Penn State lands another four-star prospect, somebody that they really prioritized in this cycle, and that is four-star offensive lineman Malachi Goodman out of the state of New Jersey. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Long time no chat to the recruiting expert himself, Brian Smith, also is the host of Locked On Seminoles, who just recently lost to Bill O'Brien. But this conversation is about how Penn State recruiting gets even better here in the middle of football season. We're past the prime of recruiting season, now into actual games, and Penn State gets Matthew Outten and Malachi Goodman back-to-back. Two prospects that were very high up on the respective position big boards. But Malachi Goodman becomes Penn State's best prospect overall in terms of the consensus ratings. So not only is this a huge get because he is an offensive lineman, but a huge get in terms of Penn State is doing what we said they needed to do, bat 1,000, and this class is continuing to get better and better and better down the stretch, Brian.
They needed another talented offensive lineman. They got it. They got a local guy. They got a guy the SEC wanted. He could play guard or play tackle. I think that's a pretty good day for Penn State recruiting.
It absolutely is, because they had to fend off the likes of Auburn, USC, who is now in the Big Ten. And you cover Auburn very closely. That's what it seemed like the battle was down to, Penn State versus Auburn. And we saw that back and forth with Alvin Henderson committing to Penn State once upon a time and then decommitted, the whole ordeal of it. But this one was a little... Malachi Goodman was just frankly pretty quiet about his recruitment. He didn't really even officially announce a top three. He just kind of said in an interview, yeah, it's really, I'm focused on Penn State, USC, and Auburn. It wasn't this graphic that was, from one of the big graphic designers in the social media atmosphere. It was just in passing, like, yeah, Penn State's up there, USC's involved, and so is Auburn, and Penn State happens to come out on top in this case.
Well, you know what? Sometimes you lose battles and sometimes you win. With Auburn and Penn State, each kind of got the local guy. Not really shocking in the end. And with that, I think Penn State can be pretty happy. Running back is not their area of concern with recruiting.
No.
That is probably the least of the Nittany Lion problem. So I think Penn State comes out ahead in this. It's hard to find plug-and-play linemen, but he's a guy that could at least compete for playing time early. I'm not saying he's physically ready and conditioning and all that, but you can't teach the frame and the athleticism. So Let's see what happens with Malachi between now and the time he gets to Happy Valley.
Yeah, Goodman, I think in any case, this doesn't need to be said, but any player that enrolls early, it obviously benefits their collegiate career. That's not rocket science. But if Goodman does enroll early, Penn State's offensive line has a lot of depth, but that superstar power that I've been talking about just at a lot of other position groups, running back with Singleton and Allen, and then a lot of positions on the defense. At offensive line, there's not really that Olu Fashanu type that is waiting. Penn State has optimism for some of its younger offensive linemen, but I think Malachi Goodman can fit that build of somebody that might project and be that superstar offensive lineman of the future. I mean, he is the top consensus prospect in the class of 2025 as we sit here right now.
Yeah, if you look at the guys they have, he complements what they're trying to do at power football. They're trying to get back into New Jersey and get more of those kids. I mean, everything about him is very important to what Franklin and his staff want. They need to be able to handle, there's two programs, Michigan and Ohio State's D-line recruiting. This is the kind of guy that you can do that with. Now you add Oregon, who's got D-line talent too. This league got a lot better, and you add SC. You never know with them. So they just beat LSU. They're obviously pretty talented. You got to get guys like this, especially when you're your backyard. And when I was growing up, this is the kind of kid that Penn State would have prioritized and would have got 9 times out of 10. They get him here. So I do not expect him to necessarily start as a freshman. I wouldn't be surprised if he played some.
No, this is a huge, massive recruiting win once again. Marcus Hagen's getting Matthew Outten, somebody that they flipped away from Virginia Tech. But Malachi Goodman's recruitment kind of extended a little bit, right? I feel like Penn State gave him a lot to think about. Consider all parties here. Auburn, is very aggressive with its NIL and is an SEC program, and I'll give credit where credit's due. They're trending in the right direction. USC is obviously what it is, but that's really far away from home. New Jersey all the way to Southern California, so I can understand why that might not be as appealing. But same thing. All these programs are similarly equal in the fact that they're just trending in the right direction with this new conference realignment. So for Penn State to win this and anchor down the region that they are primarily focused on, the Northeast, I think all things considered here, on the heels of getting Matthew Outten to flip away from Virginia Tech, and like we said, Penn State would need to go on an absolute hot streak to really reestablish this class inside of the top 10, not be a fringe top 15 that could get bumped down, with some late commitments to an Alabama or a Texas or anything. And I'm just kind of naming the top schools that kind of get late into the recruiting game with some of the other high-end 4 stars and 5 stars. So my point is that Penn State is positioning itself well with the class of 2025 to be firmly inside of the top 10 and not, hey, in some rankings, this might be the 18th or 19th class. They've really done a great job here in the middle of football season, past the prime of recruiting season.
Yeah, I think this is one of their more consistent classes in terms of how they've approached it. Mm-hmm. They got in on guys early, which Penn State staff does a great job with, but they've also stayed with them. That's probably the thing that I've noticed the most about coaching staffs that seem to come up short in recruiting consistently, especially in their own area. It's effort or lack thereof. Penn State staff is not that style at all. They do a really nice job outside their area too, not just Pennsylvania, Ohio, etc. They do a good job down south. Got kids from Texas, got kids from California. This is a pretty unique situation because not many schools do it the way they do and are that consistent. But you're seeing the dividends get paid. They just got 2 guys they really wanted. Yeah. And it's right at the end of kind of that busy season for recruiting. Now it's the season. It's sporadic until signing day. Penn State's still full throttle. That's how you win football games in the long term. You get better players than the team you're playing against.
Best overall offensive lineman, best overall prospect consensus in the class of 2025 for Penn State. That's Malachi Goodman out of the state of New Jersey. So he could be a guard or a tackle depending on what the ultimate need is. But Penn State does have 2 other players that project to being a tackle, Owen Alasini and Brady O'Hara, who's listed as a tight end in some places, but he's most likely going to end up and develop as a tackle. And then there's Michael Troutman as well, who is a center but could move to guard. He's interior. The other 3 guys that I've mentioned, including Goodman, who just recently committed, tackle most likely in this case. Goodman has the ability to move to guard if that's necessary, but he's playing tackle right now. So Penn State just checking off of the boxes. They had a list of everything they wanted to accomplish in this class of 2025. I still think they wanted some other players. Again, they're still going after wide receivers. There was that talk of a 3rd running back, so they didn't get 100%, but I feel like this is 98, 99. It's pretty close, Brian, with all of the things that they got here. 25 commits at this point in time for the class of 2025. If Penn State, even though Penn State doesn't have a bona fide top 5 class, some rankings might have them inside the top 10. Others might say, hey, they're 12th or 13th. But when the overall consensus is put together, Penn State should be inside of the top 10 with the work that they've done.
I think they got a pretty good chance. You got to figure they're going to get 1 or 2 more kids, maybe flip somebody. Kind of goes back to the effort I was talking about a minute ago. They put in the effort to get to this point. They're going to have a good season. At least I think they will. I think they'll finish in the top 10 or so. There's no reason to think they won't end up with a top 10 class as well. I don't know who projected them where, but I'm like you. I need to see it with them because they sometimes fade down the end, but they've done a really good job this year. They're kind of ahead of the curve, especially here lately, getting 2 guys that are really, really good. It's a good sign for Penn State fans. Your squad is adding some talent that, quite honestly, not everybody thought they were going to add. Good for them.
And I also want to remind listeners, viewers, that Penn State is not concerned where they finish in On3 or Rivals or 24/7. Did they win the recruiting battles that they wanted to win? And guys like Malachi Goodman, Matthew Outten recently, in addition to all the other 23 recruits. Now, again, there were some that they lost, but I think if you win 25 out of, say, 28 or 29 that you at least were in the mix for, I think Penn State is extremely content with this class, and they could care even less about what the recruiting industry says. Oh, are they 11th? Are they 12th? If you ask Penn State, they finished at the top with what they were able to do in this class of 2025. A blast from the past, Brian. You were well, I want to finish up here because I couldn't help myself. But on Monday Night Football between Florida State and Boston College, why I bring this up is because you're the host of Locked On Seminoles. I watched your post-game live show. Billy O, B.O.B., Bill O'Brien gets a 2-touchdown victory against a formerly ranked, a top 10 ranked Florida State team. My reaction is kudos to Bill O'Brien. I've always thought he's a really good football coach, aside from again being that stopgap for everything that happened in the early 2010s with, of course, the scandal and everything. So Bill O'Brien's going to mean a lot to a lot of Penn State fans for a very long time. But Brian, Florida State's just an absolute shambles, and Bill O'Brien just kind of added on top of that there.
Yeah, Florida State, it wouldn't matter who they're playing right now. They got to find out what's going on with themselves. They can't tackle. They can't block. They have no chemistry. That is a bad football team.
I would bench DJ Uiagalelei for, I know Brock Glenn played last year and would be the presumed backup here in this case, but Luke Kromenhoek, who some people might remember, Penn State got out recruited by Florida State for his commitment. I think Kromenhoek should take over if Florida State wants to save its season. I think that's actually a good team. I think Mike Norvell's a good coach, but I think it's DJU. I think he's the problem.
They got more problems than DJU. Outside of the defensive secondary, everything's got questions. One reason the secondary is not under question because teams can just run the ball. They don't have to throw it. Florida State's terrible up front. It's bizarre.
And Bill O'Brien was able to capitalize on that in that matchup against Florida State. So, Brian, I appreciate the time. All of his platforms and socials will be linked down in the description. Again, Brian is the recruiting expert here for the Locked On Podcast Network. Brian, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule again to talk Penn State recruiting, as for some reason, in the middle of football season, Penn State has been at the top of the recruiting conversation, but that is never a bad thing here. So thank you for joining me as always.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.